bit about him first, and then we'll see if he's still smiling. Dr. Andrew C. Stoker is the Senior Minister of First United Methodist Church of Dallas. He's been serving in this position of leadership in the heart of downtown Dallas since 2013. He's forged strong partnerships with the Dallas Mayor's Office, the Dallas Arts District, the Dallas Independent School District, and local and national education and literacy advocates. His formidable leadership skills and passion for equality, combined with his research in practical theology and systems theory, give Dr. Stoker a unique and clarion voice in the areas of social justice, advocacy, community outreach, and racial reconciliation. Prior to being appointed as the senior minister at First Church, Dr. Stoker served Walnut Hill United Methodist Church of Dallas, Associate Director of Congregational Ministries, North Texas Conference, and First United Methodist Church of Denton. He's co-founder and DISD representative for Pastors for Texas Children, a nonprofit organization committed to advocating for Texas children, families, and communities. Served on numerous boards in the area. And perhaps most importantly, Dr. Stoker is married to Megan Callahan Stoker, a registered pediatric nurse, and they have two sons, Alex and Wesley, who was a guest star at one of our Interfaith Thanksgiving services a couple of years ago. We can maybe tell that story. He is a graduate of Texas Tech University, earned his seminary degree from Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University, completed a Doctor of Philosophy and Family Studies from Texas Women's University. And in his spare time, he enjoys studying architecture, visiting art museums, reading, and trading jokes with his favorite rabbi friend. So that's actually not in his bio. I added that. That's just perfect. That was good, though. It seemed appropriate. So welcome, Andy Stoker. Good to have you with us this morning. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom to you, Rabbi. And it is Megan and Alex's birthday today. So it is, wow. I'm thrilled to hear their names in the bio. It brings me great joy to be with you, my very, very dear friend. So for those of you who are connecting online, thank you all so much for having me. And thank you for supporting your Rabbi, Ari Sunshine. He is a bright light in my life, and is making significant inroads in Dallas. And I give God thanks for his life and mine, and for our congregations who have a privilege to come together so frequently. So Ari, I'm looking forward to the conversation, and we'll just have to be mindful of the time today, because I think when you and I get to going, we may need a bell rung or something like that at the end of our time together. So it's a joy to be with you.
It's great to have you, and I'll try to ring the bell as necessary. But
okay, cool.
First of all, maybe I'm hoping we could get started, Andy, by you. Just tell us a little bit. Let the community get to know a little bit about you, a little bit about your story, your journey into ministry, and then ultimately coming to work at First United Methodist Church, and maybe tell us a little bit about your congregation as well.
Oh, sure. So I grew up a United Methodist Christian in El Paso, Texas. In El Paso, it's probably 80% Hispanic and not many white families. We lived close to Fort Bliss, the Army base there, where my grandfather was actually retired in 1961. My father was killed in a car accident in 1979, and we moved 2 blocks away from my grandparents in El Paso. And so growing up in El Paso, that was my connection, was my faith community down the road from me. I never imagined myself as a United Methodist pastor. My vision in high school and even early days in college was to take over late night. I wanted to be a stand-up comedian by way of weatherman.
This seems totally shocking to me. I know. I could never have seen this coming.
I know. This is news to you, I'm sure, Rabbi. And so I was majoring in broadcast journalism and thought, my route to taking over late night to sit in Johnny Carson's seat would be small town weatherman, medium-sized market, then large market, and then break in. And so although I tried very hard in karaoke contests and stand-up contests in college, I couldn't make ends meet, so I became a nighttime custodian in a United Methodist church across the street from Texas Tech University. So, and that's where I met Megan. Megan was an intern at the church, and she needed to dedicate her the rest of her schooling, nursing school, and she had to give up her position at the church. So the pastor asked me to be the intern. So from custodian to intern, I said, what do I have to give? He said, well, you're pretty good in front of people. And I said, well, if that's what it takes and I get an extra $50 a week, I'm in. And God worked on me and et cetera. So Megan and I were married, moved to Dallas. She has worked at Children's Health for 23 years. And she said, if I was serious about this marriage thing, that I need to move to Dallas and go to seminary in Dallas and all those sorts of things. So I was commissioned in the United Methodist Church in 2002, was ordained in 2005, and serving at First United Methodist Church of Denton, then worked in our bishop's office, which was the associate director of connectional ministries. What that basically meant was, and Ari, I know you and I have had this conversation, was I oversaw the child protection policy for 300 congregations in North Texas. And I also oversaw clergy and volunteer sexual misconduct cases. And I saw a part of the church that is really, really hard and difficult, and saw how I hope my gifts for ministry could manifest itself in such a way that speaks truth and can create spaces where all are welcome, and where specifically children and youth voices are held as sacred, and create systems and a place for young people to grow into their faith. So First United Methodist Church. First United Methodist Church is celebrating 175 years as a congregation this year. We are located in downtown Dallas, although we are not the first Methodist presence in downtown Dallas. As a matter of fact, St. Paul United Methodist Church is the first Methodist presence in downtown Dallas. So as a way of introducing my congregation, I always introduce St. Paul first. St. Paul was a church that was built by freed slaves. It was finally completed in 1874 and sits really in the historic Freedmen's area in downtown Dallas. My congregation, First United Methodist Church, didn't arrive at this location until 1926, where we built our sanctuary here, and about 95,000 square feet of what we hope is every square foot deployed for ministry in shaping a more compassionate Dallas. My congregation, we have about 1,800 members, and then about 750 members who affiliate to our congregation, not as full members, but because we are sort of deemed the mother church of North Texas Methodism. We have a lot of affiliate members, et cetera. So our reach, our media reach currently is, we continue to be broadcast on WFAA. And so we're sort of in this strange mix of, we're not the largest congregation in North Texas, or certainly in the United States, but our reach is significant. In the 1950s and 60s, we were the first televised Christian ministry in the Dallas area. And so we invested a lot of our dollars in those days in television ministry instead of parking. And some days that's a good thing, and mostly Sundays that's a bad thing. We have 19 parking spots, Rabbi, right out. You've parked in one of those spots. Yep. 19 parking spots for a congregation of 1,800. So it's an interesting mix. Rabbi, did I sufficiently offer the both and there on me?
Yeah, absolutely. Just for apples to apples, so our congregants can understand. When you talk about 1,800 members, do you talk about individual people or family units? What is that? Yeah. What does that demarcation mean when you say that?
Absolutely. Thanks. So 1,800 members are members who have joined the church after their confirmation. Confirmation happens at the age of 13. So this is students who are who've joined the church at their confirmation. Preparatory members, which is children 12 and under. We have about 950 children who are connected with our church in that way, both member parents and affiliates. So we're grateful for that, especially as an urban mainline Protestant church in the United States. Those are some high watermarks that I'm trying to continue to lift in front of my congregation.
Right. So, but when you talk about member, you're talking about individual people, right? That's
yeah.
As opposed to families or groupings of people, right? I got you.
Yeah.
Just because for our congregants, they think when they think of members, it could be one person or four people, like a membership unit, right? So just so people can get a little picture of the size of the congregation relative to Shearith Israel. So before we start getting a little broader in a conversation, maybe say a little bit more about United Methodism and a little bit about its roots, and also I think what might be interesting to people is to tell us a little bit about what's changed recently, and how has it been evolving in recent years?
You want me to be quick? And you want me to be quick with this one?
Well, give us the basics.
Okay. The Methodist movement started as a reform movement in the Anglican Church in the 18th century, so 1700s. Our founder, John Wesley, and his brother Charles built a reform movement in the Anglican Church focused on really the marginalized in England. This was part of a movement of starting Sunday school in England. Methodists for many years, generations, actually were educating the children in the burgeoning industrialized country of England. In the early 1800s, late 1700s, a man named Francis Asbury was deployed to what was the newly formed United States. And in the early 1800s, he was consecrated a bishop. John Wesley, our founder, said, okay, well, it seems like the spark of Methodism is alive and well in the United States. And that's what kind of launched Methodism. Methodism split as a denomination in 1846 between North and South. And that split cut across what would be the Civil War in the United States over the issue of slavery. And then we came back together in 1939, uniting the Northern and Southern Church. So my church is First United Methodist. Well, when it was launched, it was First Methodist Episcopal South. So here in Dallas, even though Texas was still kind of in this churning about where they fit in and what it looked like to embrace chattel slavery, that's where we ended up as a congregation. So in 1939, the Methodists came together under the Methodist Church, and then in 1968 here in Dallas, the the Methodist Church joined with the Evangelical United Brethren Church, mostly in the northern part of the United States, and we became the United Methodist Church. Over the last several years, well, I'll be honest. So since my baptism in 1976, when I was an infant, the United Methodist Church has been discussing, wrestling, and really the main focal point of our congregation, of our conversations as a denomination, has been human sexuality. And through the years, whether we ordain or marry same-gender loving people, this has been the conversation. It all kind of came to a head in 2019, where much of the conversation really got to a tense point, and part of our deep conversation now is, do we stay together? So Methodism is kind of on this threshold of potentially splitting apart again. And Rabbi, if you don't mind me offering just a couple of the demographics of the United Methodist Church. So the United Methodist Church in 1968 said, we have a vision to be a global denomination. And so we really launched a pretty significant, what I would say was an I had a little slip there. I'm going to stay with it. An evangelical push, specifically on the continent of Africa and in the Philippines, where since the mid-1980s, United Methodists in Africa and the Philippines have grown dramatically. It's been part of the more vibrant aspects of the United Methodist Church, and also some of our more traditionalist, folks around the conversation of human sexuality. 96% of United Methodists in the United States are white. The average age of a United Methodist congregant is 59. The average age of a United Methodist clergy person is 57. The year 2020 was the first year that we saw the shift in our population as the global United Methodist Church. 48% of United Methodists live in the United States. That means that 52% live outside of the United States, and this is a wonderful, exciting aspect to the vibrancy of the church, capital C church, but also provides a little bit of anxiety when it comes to our own understanding of who we are as a denomination, and connecting more deeply with how we're called as a denomination in having this global posture. What does it mean for predominantly white congregations to position themselves with a focus on global ministry, with a focus on an anti-racist identity, and potentially a focus on openness to what God may be up to in and through the life of our congregation, while at the same time inviting us to lean more critically into who we are and how we serve a more diverse, not only globe, but potentially a more diverse neighborhood.
Great. I appreciate that. And I know the congregation appreciates hearing a little bit more about the not only the evolution of Methodism, but also some of these more recent changes. And I'm going to flip the order of our questions just to piggyback off something you said there. You talked a little bit about in terms of the issue of specifically of sexuality and some schism, essentially in Methodism. So one of the things that you and I have talked about a number of times is the challenge of being ministers or pastors at centrist congregations. And I have told you also before that in my previous congregation as well, I found that my my Christian pastor friends that I most closely connected with and resonated with tended to be Methodist pastors. And that's because I think on some level we really have a very similar worldview about how the Bible works and just how we interact with the world in general. But to put the question to you, and again, since I know we've talked about it before, how do we how do you see it as a pastor of a centrist congregation, right? How do you see walking, navigating complex, what we'll call politicized issues, and trying to figure out how to frame that for your community, which is not all in the center, right? Which is to say there are folks on the left of issues and on the right of issues. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you tend to approach that.
Yeah, a few years ago, Ari, I think it was practiced probably at a staff meeting, and then I preached it. Eventually, was my job over the last 8 years at First United Methodist Church of Dallas has been like running cinnamon flavored dental floss down the center part of the aisle. And then during my sermons, I tiptoe along the cinnamon flavored dental floss so as not to muss anyone's, so we can all stay focused on, what God is up to and how God is speaking to us. So using the words, which, 20 years ago, using the words like justice, compassion, using words like even openness or solidarity, these words have become politicized. I moved over the last 4 years, I moved from being an extemporaneous preacher to being a manuscript preacher, just to be far more careful with everything that I'm saying. In a centrist church, in a centrist denomination, and I'll step on your toes and include you in this, leading a centrist congregation. The work of rabbis, pastors, imams is vitally important. I think our primary role in centrist congregations is to keep people at the table. How much can I step into areas of conflict and challenge so that we can stay in the conversation without canceling each other out or turning people off or having people leave? The strength of the congregation doesn't come in homogeneity. The strength of the congregation comes in its diversity. We see this in nature. God's creative spirit is in nature, teaching us that diversity is power, diversity is vibrancy, diversity is richness. Not to get ahead of ourselves just a little bit, Rabbi, but that's why we're in relationship with one another. That's why I believe some of our ecumenical work, some of our multi-faith work, some of our congregational work together has been focused on this kind of passion around seeing the world in all of its beautiful technicolor and not just seeing the world in black or white, in blue or red. Instead, seeing the fullness of what this looks like. And our jobs have gotten, I think, more difficult because the world is moving at such a quick clip. The culture around us is shifting and changing. So just think of the pandemic, the necessary social change, the chasm between the haves and the have-nots. Now, I'm not just saying about the vaccine. I mean hunger employment, housing. I mean, the snowpocalypse that we had a month ago, 6 weeks ago, was another indicator of the kind of work that we need to do. And Rabbi Sunshine, what I see in you consistently is you consistently do this beautiful job of marrying what is absolutely essential to step into and overlaying that with a beautiful theological construct so that people can see that our faith isn't separated from what's going on in the polis, in the city, in our engagement, in our engagement as one another, but our faith is absolutely essential. And people are looking to people of faith like us, like everyone on this call today, like everyone on Facebook Live today. The world is looking to people of faith because we're getting into some really challenging areas. And if we can't hold that tension, hold that difference with great respect and compassion, then potentially we falter apart. So I know that you and I love one another because of the things that hold us in common. And I know, Ari, that you and I love each other even more deeply and have a deeper respect for one another because we come at life and faith from different angles, and yet we commit ourselves to staying at the table and walking together through thick or thin. And that's what I hope that our congregations are seeing in themselves as well. This strength isn't just for a clergy class. This is for all of us.
Right. I think it's so beautifully said, Andy. And I would add that, and just to sort of name it really clearly, that as centrist congregations in the center of the country, right, in a sense, the stakes feel very high, right? That the idea of what's expected of communities like ours trying to hold things together, right? That it feels like there's a lot of weight there because in so many places, right, there is so much fracturing and so much complete polarization, right? Either all the, further to the left or further to the right. So it feels like where communities have more of that, in a sense, well, political, a purple blend, right? There's just so much riding on it, right? Like you just said, in terms of being able to keep to navigate this, keeping people, like you just described, keeping people at the table, which, by the way, it happens to be a great tie-in, of course, to Pesach, to Passover.
Right.
When we talk about 4 children in the Seder night in the Haggadah, one of whom is the wicked child who the complaint against said child is basically the child is wants to be out of the story. I don't want to be in the conversation. I want to remove myself. This isn't my story, right? So one of our challenges as pastors is, especially in centrist congregations, in such centrist areas, right, on some level, is to be able to say, guys, you got to stay at the table, right? Like, this is, don't say this isn't my table, right? And this isn't a place for me. But of course, that also means that we have to be, as you said, with the cinnamon flavored dental floss idea, right? That we have to walk a very fine line, trying to have a moral voice, but also a voice of being able to, of unity, not because we all agree, but even because we don't, right? We have to find a place, some common ground to be able to share. And I think that's really important for people to hear, because I know you hear, I know I hear, whenever we weigh in on any level, either through sermons or written teachings or messages to the congregation, and in go out via email or whatnot, that whenever we say something that someone might disagree with, right, we get a lot of pushback, and we sometimes get the opposite pushback, which is you didn't go far enough, right? So I think that I'm grateful that you've also articulated the challenge of having that moral voice, but that at least, I would say, at least as important is this idea of this of holding a line and trying to keep people at the table together, and rather than pushing people further away from each other. So it's it's both a challenge and a weight, as well as an opportunity and a powerful responsibility, I think. So I thank you for trying to help name that for us as well. Look, a lot has changed. You started mentioning the pandemic, of course, and what that's brought into focus for us, especially in terms of inequity in society. But what about in terms of ministering and congregational life during and after the pandemic? I know in the Jewish world, it feels like so much has changed about how to be a rabbi and how to be a congregation. What does that even look like now? What's it going to look like in a few months, or even just in a year? I mean, like, what's the changing landscape, and how are we retooling as pastors and ministers and faith communities to better engage and connect with people in our pandemic and post-pandemic age? So I'd love to hear some thoughts from you about how that's played out for you and for your congregation.
Yeah, I think the good news was on our end is that my congregation was used to being televised. So the whole idea that church is on TV kind of thing, I didn't have to fight that battle. We haven't really talked about that, Ari, but with your congregation, but it was really kind of an open door for me. So from a technological standpoint, First United Methodist Church was, oh yeah, let's do an online thing. That's no problem. We've got the cameras. Let's roll in. Just send us the link and we'll log on. It's some of the other stuff that was a little more challenging. I didn't realize truly, and so Christian theology, you have this idea that the church is the body of Christ. There are many members, and the church is both a building and a people. So you have this kind of both and thing going on. It's really come as a wonderful gift from my own reflection, just to see how building centric my congregation was, and how the anchor of the building was both an invitation to grieve and also an invitation for thinking more critically about who we really are outside the walls of the church. So during the pandemic, Sunday school classes, small groups, we've all been on Zoom. We've added a couple of courses. I'm doing a lot right now with Insight Timer, providing meditations on Insight Timer, which is a nice thing. I started a parenting podcast with a pediatrician and a psychologist last May, just because I was hearing from parents of specifically young children, and then that expanded to adolescents, and then we've had a couple of episodes with parents of young adults in this season. So, I mean, my job has shifted dramatically, pastoral care-wise. Ari, and I know we haven't had this conversation, and I may need to call you on it because I'm coming out of the pandemic and preparing for in-person. I'm praying for your congregation as you come back to in-person ministries there. But during the pandemic, especially during the quarantine, when people were had to be behind closed doors, and they didn't have the distractions of tennis and golf and book clubs and things like that, what was happening with some of my members was far more focus inward, and some adverse childhood trauma, flashbacks from war, even some in my congregation who are struggling with their gender identity, struggling with their sexual orientation in this time. So my pastoral care, I've really had to dig very deep into some grief work with my congregation, which has affected me greatly, has affected the way I'm preaching, has affected the way, being on TV since the 1960s, the congregation sort of expects this performative, preacher. And I sort of feel like, the televangelist chaplain who just looks right into the camera and tries to speak so clearly and calmly so people can feel that, that there's some connection, because we're so deep in the grief process. Post-pandemic, Ari, I don't know about you all, but we're talking very seriously about keeping the both virtual and in person. Our worship numbers haven't really waned in the pandemic. We've been able to connect with our congregation in a real way. Now, not everybody's consuming worship, pardon the verb, on Sunday morning. I mean, I was talking with a member the other day who called me Wednesday afternoon. Oh, Andy, Palm Sunday service was wonderful. And so I joked with her and said, "You mean Palm Wednesday? Like, what's, it's now, you're 3 days out from Sunday and you're watching worship." So, how do we connect where people are? And does that I see my cup is half full to overflowing all the time. This is a greater opportunity for us, I think, especially for the extroverts out there, Ari, like you and me, to really try to extrovert the congregation in such a way that they can engage whenever they can, while at the same time honoring Sabbath when it's in their own individual ways. So it's maybe reteaching, retooling our congregations to say, okay, here's when you're not just watching or consuming worship, you are participating even virtually in what God is up to in your life in this very moment, and you're participating in community. So I have a lot more to say about that, and it's mostly just unvarnished ideas at this point, but excited to get the review from you maybe in the next couple of weeks about coming back to Shabbat services.
Sure. Yeah. Andy, thank you. And it's, I mean, the both and very much is where our heads are at as we begin the slow transition process. You articulate, you talk about grief, whether we call it grief or depression, in any case, the weightiness of the last year for so many people has definitely required more pastoral work, not just from clergy, but from congregant to congregant, which is another thing that we've tried to amplify as much as possible. And I know we're going to keep trying to do going forward. So this is what I'm going to suggest, friends. So there's one more question that Andy and I are going to discuss, but if anybody wanted to post a question, I haven't seen anybody post anything yet. Go ahead and put that in the chat box or send it to me, you can post it to me privately. But I do want to make a specific connection to why we're gathering today, of all days, right? There's, we could have done this lots of different times, but we happen to do this on Pesach and Easter weekend. So I want to make sure that before we do wrap up, we talk a couple of minutes about the meta narratives of each of these holidays. And when I say meta narratives, how do they not the nuts and bolts of the holidays, but how do the stories of these holidays charge us to be better people, to impact the world around us, and to, in a sense, make it holier, to connect with a larger world than our own. I don't just mean individually, but larger than our community and larger than our own faith tradition even. So maybe to tell us a little bit about how you see Easter and its narratives or messages amplifying that, and what it means for Christians in the world.
Yeah. So I'm going to try to blend this just a little bit, just in case there is a question that comes up, Ari, and maybe advance the conversation. So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm honored to be here, especially on this day, on this weekend. This is a true blessing for my Easter vigil, for what it means for me to be with you. And this is maybe the narrative of our two faith traditions with Passover and with Holy Week into Easter. We're made for belonging, and we're also made for life. And to see and sense that we belong to God and we belong together, that we're knit, and that our lives are inextricably linked to one another. This is the notion of pointing to belonging, pointing to life. Whether you're of the Jewish faith or the Christian faith, we can begin to see how the larger aspect of our faith traditions really is leaning into this base level understanding of the human condition. Anecdotally, I'm not a biblical memorializationalist at all. So, Methodists can kind of give you the context, but they can't give you chapter and verse. But I know that more often than not in Scripture, the admonition is more frequently, take courage, do not be afraid. And over again, this idea of taking courage and not being afraid, I think, points to our collective longing for belonging, and our rising to life, and God claiming that life for and with us. Also, Passover and Easter isn't the end of a story. It's actually an opening to a new beginning together, a new way of seeing how partnerships and life together can be far more than we can ever imagine, because there are neighbors just like you all, connected in, here we sit, connected technologically. God is doing something new in and through us. God is allowing us in our hearts, our minds, our lives to connect with one another through technology. We are made for life. We are made for belonging. So I'm sort of stopping myself, not getting too preachy here, Ari. So anything you want to push back on or amplify on that?
Just add that I think from the Jewish perspective, in terms of Pesach, Passover, one of the things that's quite powerful about it, and it bears reminding folks of, is that it's not just about telling the story at the Seder, for example, of liberation in the past. It's not a story that ended in that sense. Right? Yes. Redemption and liberation and oppression, all of that continues in different ways. So part of the reason that we tell the story is for gratitude, for one thing, but also to challenge us to be more, right? To challenge us when we see things that are broken in the world, to work towards its redemption, right? So if we live through oppression, then we should understand and how awful it is to be in that space, and there to be, and then what that calls upon us to do, to put ourselves out there to try to push back against that oppression in whatever form we see it, right? So in a sense, Pesach is an Israelite, it's a Jewish story, right? But at the same time, the meta narratives of oppression and liberation, redemption, and how that all fits together as not just something in the past, but something that we navigate in the present, and navigate it in the present to push for a better future. Right, so the redemption that Elijah the prophet is going to herald, right? What we call in the Jewish tradition the Messianic age, is gonna, that eventually we'll get there, but that's not going to happen if we don't put ourselves out there to be a part of the world, and again see where there's brokenness and try to be there with others in rolling up our sleeves to try to address that. So I think that's for the Pesach narrative, that's really that's powerful and important for us to remember as Jews, because oftentimes we just think of it as, I'm telling the story, right? It's not just we tell the story for a reason, right? So because it's to help us look into to ground ourselves in the present as well, and think about what the future should be like and what's our role in creating that. So I think
Yeah, I so appreciate that that perspective. You know, in the Protestant tradition, the symbol for Christianity is the cross. In the Protestant tradition, and so somewhere along the way, the cross became empty. We removed the crucified image off the cross. And so I think the danger, and what I'm hearing in what you're saying is the danger of jumping to liberation without sitting in the suffering and oppression, and trying to alleviate it in whatever forms they present themselves, in the here and now, is actually helping us to stay with, find solidarity, grow in our compassion and empathy for all of our neighbors, and find a way that collectively there is a movement for us to get up off our seats and be motivated to change, transform the world with God's help. So thank you for raising that. I really appreciate that reflection.
Sure. And, I think for a good way for us to close, since we have run out of time, which we knew was going to happen.
I know.
To be fair, folks, we started a few minutes late. So we
was it the karaoke? Was it the karaoke thing? I mean, what?
So, but really where we've landed at the end, I think, is an important place to wrap, which is, what does this mean on a practical level for us, right? You and I have talked about, we've collaborated on multiple projects in the last few years. And I think we first met at the Dallas Morning News office. I believe they were doing a convening of clergy right after I had moved to town. To talk about how they report on faith and what they write about. So I think that's the first time we actually met in person. But we've collaborated on interfaith Thanksgiving services. And that was the story I was going to say about Andy's son, Wes. When we hosted the first year at Shearith would have been 2018, Wes was there. And he was, what was he, 10 or 11 at the time? 12? I forget. Yeah, something right. So we were counting. We raised money for North Texas Food Bank, and he was like our counter extraordinaire. Like, he was so excited to come and report what the final count was. It's like he brought me the paper. Like, here it is. This is how much we raised. So I was like, this is a future pastor right here. He's ready to go. But so we've worked together on Thanksgiving services. We've Faith Forward Dallas, of course, looking at all kinds of issues in our local community. And you were kind enough and gracious enough to invite me to participate in your First United Methodist Church Psalm series. So I spoke about Psalm
for
23.
Sunday morning worship. You preached on Sunday morning. Absolutely, yeah.
That's right. Well, so this is good. You got your shot here. Right?
Thank you.
And you didn't even have to leave your house, so that was great. So
I'm at the office this morning. So yeah.
So there we go. So listen, I just want to say, first of all, thank you again for, especially on a busy weekend for you and for your family and your congregation, to make the time to be with us this Shabbat and this Pesach, and to share in this dialogue that is, as you and I have talked about, is an ongoing dialogue for us. But ultimately a dialogue and relationship for our congregations and for our larger community here in Dallas, that we realize that we should not be, if nothing else, among the terrible price that we've paid in the pandemic, one of the blessings, the small blessings, is that the world has hopefully felt smaller for people, to be able to connect to and access things and people and communities that they wouldn't have been able to do or weren't looking to do beforehand, and to connect with. And so I think the more doors we can open and have been able to open in this last year plus, the stronger the relationships and the bridges that we're going to continue to build in the years ahead, as we are able to do even more of it, thankfully, God willing, in person. So thank you so much. Once again, just a real treat to have you with us. I want to wish you, you and Megan and the kids and your congregation